we dive deeper into this topic, please let me shortly share with you some background information and practical information with you, some words on the objectives of the projects and our areas of actions. The objective of the CCC COSIA project is to support the ASEAN member states in CO2 reduction from international aviation, and our areas of actions are COSIA implementation, support to state action plan for CO2 reduction, facilitating emission data management systems, and climate change policy, for instance, on SAF. Some practicalities and something about the project team. Let me introduce to you our project manager, Santiago Ayaleva. I think you might know him already from previous webinars if you have followed them beforehand. He will later take over for the question and answer session. And of course, Ralf Kosman, who was playing an important role in the previous webinars, who is the operations manager of the project. As I said, it's all about communication and exchange, and this is why we will address the webinar in an interactive manner, and we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. So to address your question, please make use of our interactive tool Slido, which will appear in the WebEx application on the right-hand side under Apps. In Slido, you are able to see your questions and also the ones from other participants, and you can even like or vote up or down questions. And just for your information, we also have the chat function open for you for posting questions. For those not being able to see Slido directly on WebEx, you can also open the tool in a separate browser. For this, you can go to slido.com and then enter hashtag SAF7 and then the password FKXK4U. We will also post the code in the chat function. So enough about practicalities. So let's come back to the topic of the seminar, environmental reporting. Today, we would like to give you an insight on the current state of play of environmental reporting in Europe. How is environmental performance of the aviation sector measured? What actions are put in place to drive forward sustainability ambitions? And more concretely speaking, what is needed for monitoring the performance of the SAF sector, and how can this be related to the ASEAN market? And all the answers to these questions will be provided by our two environmental experts. Let me shortly introduce Steve and Joonas. They are there, you can see them. Steve is EASA's chief environmental expert. He has worked in the area of aviation and environmental protection for the last 25 years and in the EASA since 2005. He has led work in developing global environmental standards on aircraft noise and CO2 emissions, as well as market-based measures, where he is currently co-rapporteur of the ICAO Working Group for COSIA. And over the past 7 years, he has instigated the EASA European Aviation, so there's a European Aviation Environmental Report, and most recently he has been supporting the development of SAF initiatives to facilitate the uptake in Europe. Let's come to Joonas. As EASA environmental expert, Joonas is mostly covering climate change related topics, in particular market-based measures and carbon pricing mechanism. His responsibilities also comprise monitoring the development of the sustainable climate financing sector. And Joonas provides also market-based measures related technical support to the European Commission. He participates in ICAO working groups and oversees MBM research projects, and which is now happening here, supports international cooperation projects in his area of expertise. As a side remark, both joined the last ICAO assembly, and I'm sure they can provide first-hand information. Thank you. And please now, Stefan, Joonas, the floor is yours. You can take over the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today to contribute towards these webinars on communication tools, and one of those that we want to focus on today is the European Aviation Environmental Report, to give you some insight in terms of the report itself, how it's developed, the content of it, and how it's been useful within the European region in terms of communicating on the topic of environmental protection and sustainability within the aviation sector. So I'll start with the presentation. Joonas will take over, and then we'll be happy to take any questions at the end. So a bit of background first with regard to this particular tool that we use to communicate within Europe. The work on the environmental report was initiated back in 2014, with the first report published in 2016 with the support of the European Environment Agency and Eurocontrol. We felt it was useful or important to cooperate with the European Environment Agency as the European Aviation Agency to give that balanced perspective and credibility in terms of the information and the messages that were being communicated through this report. Following that initial publication, it was seen as a useful tool, so it was subsequently integrated into EASA's remit through the basic regulation. So we now have something built into our legislative remit, Article 87, that requires EASA to produce this environmental report every 3 years. And the latest version for 2022 was published just on the 21st of September. So we'll provide some insight in terms of what's in that report to give you the latest hot off the press information that's been compiled in terms of what's going on within Europe in this area. The content of the report and the structure, that really has evolved over time. In fact, the whole report evolves over time. After each report, we reflect on the process, the content, and discuss, did it achieve its objectives? How can we improve it such that hopefully for each report it does improve and get better over time based on the lessons learned and also the capabilities that we develop in terms of data streams, modeling capabilities. If we identify there's gaps in terms of information that we're looking to contain in the report, that is a good way of then focusing future work to fill those gaps. The report looks at the historic and forecasted environmental performance of the aviation sector, typically looking back to 1990 and looking out to 2050. It summarizes the latest scientific understanding on the environmental impacts from the aviation sector, which obviously evolves over time based on the latest research. It then touches on the main mitigation areas based on what we understand to be the historic future environmental impact from the operations of the aviation sector, what is being done to actually mitigate those environmental impacts. And those are broken down into 5 main areas, looking at technology and design, sustainable aviation fuels, which is clearly relevant to the series of webinars here, air traffic management operations, airports and market-based measures. And we'll touch on those within this presentation. In addition to that, within the latest reports, we've been asked to include recommendations on how to further improve the level of environmental protection. And so if you look at the report on the website, you'll see that within the download area on the website, you're able to download all of the main reports, of which the latest one has recommendations. Within that section, you're also able to download the executive summary in all EU and UN languages, which again, we felt was very important in terms of being able to reach out and communicate to EU citizens by capturing the key messages within the report and the recommendations so that they can engage with this topic. And also, you're able to download the data that underpins some of the main figures within the report. So again, trying to ensure there's a high level of transparency and sharing of information with the report, such that if people want detailed information on the data that underpins the figures, they're able to download that in an Excel spreadsheet. And these all act as a kind of communication tool, a hub, through different means to communicate to the audience. In addition, the recommendations that in the report this time around, and also the content, those feed into the EASA Sustainable Aviation Program. So we use these reports as a overview of what's going on at this point in time to identify what needs to be done and to inform the work program going forward over the next 3 years based on the data that we've compiled. And that also feeds into the EU and member state policymakers as well. So the main objectives of the report are to facilitate coordination at a European regional level, and that the latest report covers the EU 27 and EFTA. This builds on national initiatives, so we work closely with the member states within Europe, and the process facilitates that working relationship both within the member states but also the organizations at the European level to be able to effectively coordinate on what's going on within the region. It provides an independent, objective and accurate source of information, which is, I think, important to try and ensure that there's some transparency on what's going on within the region, some accountability, what's working, what's not working, the credibility in terms of delivering policy goals, and trust that in terms of EU citizens that what the mitigation measures being put in place are actually going to achieve the goals that have been agreed. The report we also try to write in plain English, which is often quite difficult on a technical subject such as this, but we try to ensure that it's written in such a way that people can engage with it in terms of a wide range of audience, and that includes the public and policymakers. And we use, obviously, the report to support communication on European initiatives, both within Europe but also internationally. As I said, it provides input into international level processes. This includes international cooperation projects such as this one. Also feeds into ICAO state action plans, which I'm sure you're all aware of in terms of reporting on what's going on to mitigate emissions, and may also feed into the monitoring process of the recently agreed long-term aspirational goal, where progress towards the goal that was recently agreed at the ICAO 41st Assembly. A monitoring process is due to be put in place to support that goal, and the environmental report may well be a source of input into that particular process. The environmental report also enables us to develop modelling capabilities and data streams to support the performance indicators to get some better insight on what's going on. As I said, it provides a historic and forecasted trends so we can see how things are evolving over time. And it supports performance-based regulation by actually facilitating an overview and measuring the outcome of regulations, regulatory remits that are put in place to see whether what they expected to achieve is actually happening. And it feeds that back into the policymakers to complete the circle that you see on the right-hand side there. So there is some feedback loop to the policymakers on the effectiveness of what they've put in place. And then finally, on the background, we have the governance. We collaborate with a very diverse set of organizations to ensure that the report is comprehensive and balanced. Again, this is very important to ensure it's considered to be a credible communication tool that can be used to inform policymaking. Typically, we have a steering group made up of the main authors, so EASA, the European Environment Agency, Eurocontrol, the European Commission, the Clean Sky and CESAR joint undertakings, and European member states. And to complement that, we also have an advisory group made up of the key industry sectors, airlines, airports, local authorities, ANSPs, also passengers, fuel producers, manufacturers, but also non-governmental organizations and research organizations. So hopefully that gives you an idea as to the environmental report, where it's come from, its objectives, and we're going to now dive into the content of the latest version that was published just in September. So first of all, there's a chapter within the report that looks at the sector overview. So it provides some high-level information with regard to what is being supplied by the sector, so in terms of number of flights, connectivity, etc., and then gets into what's the environmental impact of supplying those services, that air traffic. So what you have on this screen here is an overview of, on the left-hand side, the number of flights, how they have evolved since 2005. Clearly, the impact that COVID has had over the last 3 years. So the last 3 years have been quite dramatic in terms of not just traffic, but also European policymaking from an environmental perspective. But this figure clearly shows the dip, the recovery that we've seen last year, and then the future forecast, which is lower in terms of growth compared to pre-pandemic. On the right-hand side, we have a performance indicator that we use in terms of the average aircraft age per flight. This is considered to be useful in terms of giving some indication as to the environmental performance of the fleet that's operating within Europe. So a younger fleet typically has better environmental performance. So this is one indicator that we track from that perspective. So as I said, we monitor the traffic, and then to complement that, we have the environmental impact that occurs as a result of that traffic. The top left-hand side gives you an indication as to the noise impact, looking at major airports within Europe. We can see the noise trends there from the impact of COVID, but also going out to 2050. And at this point in time, we do envisage potentially a leveling out and a slight reduction in the noise impact, primarily due to fleet renewal in terms of new aircraft types that have been certified over the last 10 years. So the A320neo, 737 MAX, 787, A350, etc. All those new aircraft types are starting to penetrate the fleet and having some mitigating impact on noise. On the bottom left-hand side, we start to look at emissions, and that's covering NOx, which we use as a performance indicator for airport air quality. And then on the right-hand side at the top, we have CO2 emissions, clearly directly related to fuel burn. And on the bottom right-hand side, we take the base traffic scenario in dark blue, and we break it down into the potential mitigation in terms of net CO2 emissions that would result from improvements in technology, ATM ops, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen and electric, to give some idea as to what are the potential emission reductions that you get from in-sector measures. You'll see on the bottom right-hand figure, there's also a before between 2013 and 2020, there's a grey area below the line. That is the impact of the EU emissions trading scheme in terms of net CO2 emissions. We haven't forecasted the impact of market-based measures going forward in terms of the ETS and CORSIA, based on all of the ongoing discussions that were happening at the time in terms of the CORSIA periodic review and the ETS review. But we try to capture as much information as we can to give some indication as to how the sector will evolve in terms of net CO2 emissions, which is clearly one of the critical performance indicators and also linked to the long-term aspirational goal that's been recently agreed. Some of the key messages in the sector overview is that 50% of the operations in Europe during 2020 were compliant with the latest Chapter 14 noise standard, which shows the fleet penetration of the latest, quietest aircraft, and I think is one of the reasons why ICAO is now reviewing the latest noise standard in its current Cape Work program. As I said, the fleet renewal is helping to reduce the total noise exposure at European airports. From a CO2 emissions perspective, that shaded blue figure suggests that in 2050 we could see a 69% reduction in net CO2 compared to a technology-free scenario through in-sector measures. We've also seen that in terms of long-haul flights, these account for about 6% of departures during 2019, but 50% of all CO2 and NOx emissions. So that really gives some indication as to where the main contributors are in terms of emissions, focusing on sort of the long-haul sector. And in comparison, when you look at noise in terms of its impact around airports, 64% of what we call total noise energy comes from single-aisle jets. So that's more focused on short-haul operations. And then finally, we look at average grams CO2 per passenger kilometre. That went down to 89 grams in 2019, and we convert that to a litres fuel per 100 passenger kilometre in order to try and make some direct comparison with performance indicators that are typically used in the auto industry. Moving on to the environmental impacts chapter. This chapter has identified, based on some of the latest research, that aircraft noise affects fewer people than road and rail, but is regarded as more annoying in terms of its characteristics and where it originates from. From a non-CO2 emissions perspective, the focus in terms of emissions from the aviation sector has predominantly been focused on CO2 emissions, but non-CO2 emissions is becoming more back into the spotlight as something that needs to be addressed alongside CO2 emissions. And the latest research study suggests that non-CO2 emissions account for about 2/3 of the aviation net warming effect. But it's very important to understand that the uncertainty associated with these effects is 8 times larger than that of CO2. So it's not just looking at one aspect of this. You need to take into account the bigger picture in terms of the latest science on this topic. There are various existing policies looking to address non-CO2 emissions. We have engine emission standards for NOx and PM. There's also a significant drive on promoting sustainable aviation fuel, which also mitigates some of the non-CO2 impacts. So work is looking into mitigating this, but there is a desire to try and understand how can we go beyond that? What additional policy measures could be put in place to address this issue, considering the potential impact it has? The challenge we have is looking at policy options where there's trade-offs between CO2 and non-CO2 in terms of the metric you use and the time horizon. One of the statistics that's constantly mentioned is that international aviation contributes about 2% to global CO2 emissions, and that figure has remained fairly stable over years. What we've included in the latest report is some additional sort of figures to try and go beyond just that 2% figure, because that 2% figure stays fairly stable because of the overall growth in emissions. But what we've tried to highlight here is that the growth in CO2 emissions has been accelerating, and that half of the global CO2 emissions between 1940 and 2019 have occurred since 2000. And alongside that, in terms of the actual emissions impact, we've noted in the report that the IPCC 6th assessment has highlighted that aviation is still in the early stages of climate adaptation and resilience to potential climate hazards that will occur in the future. So this is something certainly within EASA that we're looking to study in more detail to try and understand what are the trends in terms of potential climate hazards and risks as a result of climate change, both historically but also into the future. On technology and design, the report provides all of the latest certification data on products from an aircraft and an engine perspective. We've seen in terms of recent data that most new aircraft designs have a margin of 5 to 15 dB to Chapter 14. There has, in the last few years, been an increased activities within new market segments, such as drones and urban air mobility. We've noted that with the introduction of the CO2 standard, that engine NOx and particulate matter emission standards and the aircraft noise and CO2 standards at an ICAO level, so internationally, these define the design space the manufacturers are having to work within to produce products to address the whole range of environmental impacts, noise, air quality, and climate change. We've then also just highlighted some of the most recent developments in terms of products that have been certified. The Pipistrel Electro was the first electric aircraft to be certified in 2020. And then Airbus brought forward an application to certify the A330-900neo in 2021 against the new CO2 emission standard. And that was the first aircraft to be approved worldwide against this new standard. So I'll pass over to Joonas now to talk you through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Steve. And hello everyone. It's Joonas here, and I will cover the rest of the presentation. So continuing with the key messages from different chapters of the report. There's a chapter on sustainable aviation fuels, which is indeed an area where industry and regulators are very much looking into as a mid-term solution to reduce the carbon footprint. On SAF, one of the key findings in the report is that the supply level remains rather low. So in total, talking in European Union, we have less than 0.05% of the total fuel use that is SAF at the time of releasing this report. So still very low levels. But in order to change this, there are proposals in Europe to put a SAF blending mandate in place. So the Refuel EU regulation foresees minimum shares of SAF that would gradually increase over time. So starting with I think 2% in 2025, leading up all the way to 63% in 2050. And there are also sub-mandates for power to liquid fuels gradually growing over time. So this is one of the key policy initiatives right now in Europe trying to incentivize the usage of SAF and the growing share of SAF within the EU fuel system. One of the beauties of SAF is that one can use SAF as a drop-in fuel in existing aviation fleet, so there's no direct changes necessarily needed in terms of aircraft that are being operated with SAF. Right now, depending a bit on the production pathway of the SAF and the feedstocks, the maximum blending ratio of SAF is around 50%, as you probably know very well from the previous webinars. So SAF is being blended with fossil-based fuel, and right now it is possible to blend it up to a ratio of 50%. But there's work ongoing by the industry and standardization committees aiming to approve 100% SAF by 2030. Of course, the certification of SAF is really important against the sustainability criteria in order to ensure that the SAF is really sustainable. And there are so-called sustainability certification schemes who have been talking about their work throughout the webinars as well. So there's criteria defined at EU level, but there's also criteria defined within the CORSIA framework, and these certification schemes are the ones that ensure that the fuels are being certified against the relevant certification requirements. And of course, one of the key topics that always gets discussed when we talk about SAF is the cost. So right now, SAF in general is 3 to 4 times more expensive compared to jet fuel on a general level, depending on the production pathway, of course, the technology. But once the production of SAF scales up, it is expected that there will be cost savings through economics of scale once the producers gain more experience, once the supply chains get established. So this is expected to actually become closer to the fossil fuel price in the future. Also, market-based measures do play a role here. Next slide, please. Then when we talk about air traffic management and operations in Europe, the Green Deal requires a holistic and ambitious approach towards all stakeholders in the ATM ops community to reduce fragmentation of air traffic management systems. So unfortunately, still in Europe, we see a certain level of fragmentation between the ATM sectors, which is not ideal from efficiency and environmental perspective. So there is actually a goal to reduce average CO2 emissions per flight by 5 to 10% by 2035 compared to 2017. And this is a goal towards which we are working in Europe in the ATM ops field. There are so-called performance targets and reference periods, and the reference periods are periods of time, usually 5 years, during which we compare the performance against the goals. And on a general level, it can be mentioned that during the recent reference period, the goals were not reached, which is of course a key observation and also a bit of concern in terms of the environmental performance. So the goals are not met during the recent reference period due to the pandemic and the drop in terms of air transport, especially in 2020. There were some efficiencies observed in the ATM system, although in Europe not all member states achieved their goals despite this drop of traffic. So obviously, once we recover from the pandemic, these efficiency gains should be maintained towards the future. One observation is also that some of the KPIs that are being used to measure the efficiency of the ATM system do not necessarily reflect or are not necessarily fit for purpose for this job. So there's work ongoing to actually review the KPIs, the key performance indicators in the ATM ops field. Next one, please. So continuing on this topic, as mentioned, the efficiency improvements should be maintained that were observed during the drop of traffic thanks to the pandemic. One quite interesting topic here in Europe is the fuel tankering. So this means a practice where a flight actually uplifts more fuel that is required to operate that particular flight. And this is due to differences in jet fuel prices in different countries and different airports. So actually some airlines, many airlines indeed, they are taking advantage of tankering, so to uplift more fuel on an airdrome where it's cheaper compared to other airports. So this of course represents net savings in terms of money used for fuel uplifts, but the report also found out that this actually results in additional fuel burn throughout the European air traffic network, roughly representing 0.5% of the all jet fuel used. So might sound as a small number, but still, when you think about it, that this is only because of extra fuel uplifted to existing flights, one could imagine that there could be improvements here as well. There is, of course, research going on in Europe in this field, and there is something called CESAR, so Single European Sky ATM Research initiative that is constantly looking into improvements in the ATM network to actually achieve those efficiency goals that have been set to the sector. Next one, please. Very quickly about the airports. So if you look into the report, there's also a dedicated chapter for airports and their environmental performance. Some key highlights here, just to mention here, is the EASA environmental portal. So this is quite a recent development from EASA's side. This is a portal that was launched to facilitate sharing of aircraft noise certificates and aircraft noise and performance data between airlines that use certain types of aircraft, the regulators, and the airports. So this is one of the key developments. We are still seeing some delays in approving and implementing the performance-based navigation plans in Europe. So these are plans aimed to improve the efficiency of the air transport navigation in a way that it would be more performance-based, but still some delays in terms of fully implementing such plans. Collaboration in terms of airports is of course critical in terms of bringing all the stakeholders together to identify optimum solutions. One quite important aspect once we transition towards novel energy sources is to make sure that the airport infrastructure is adapted according to the new fuel types. I just want to refer to the hydrogen here. So if in the future there will be planes flying with hydrogen, this will require certain adjustments to the airport infrastructure to actually accommodate the supply of hydrogen to the aircraft. So just to mention one example here. There is something called the Zero Pollution Action Plan within the European Green Deal. that is aiming to further reduce transport noise and air pollution impact, which has an impact especially on airports in the aviation world. And the last couple of points here refer to industry initiatives in terms of airports. So the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program has been in place for some years. It's been enhanced in the course of time, so there are new levels being added to this program to support airports in achieving net zero emissions. And actually in Europe, quite many airports, 90 of them, have already set net zero targets by 2030, and some airports have already reached these targets. Next slide, please. So the last chapter in the report talks about market-based measures. So this is an area where you may know that in Europe we have quite extensive experience already. Starting in 2013, the EU ETS has been in place, currently covering the flights within the European Economic Area. In the duration and existence of the EU ETS, the scheme has resulted in total net reduction of 159 million tons of CO2, so roughly equal to the annual emissions of the Netherlands, through funding of emission reductions from other schemes. So aviation is not the only sector covered by the EU ETS. Some other sectors like energy production have actually managed to reduce their emissions within the EU ETS, while aviation sector has grown its emissions. So this has led into a situation where aviation sector has purchased EU ETS allowances from other sectors, thus mitigating its CO2 impact. Also, I believe many of you know that the ICAO CORSIA has been implemented since 2019 in terms of its MRV system. In the report, we have some basic information about the ICAO CORSIA. We are quite delighted to see a gradual increase of states that have volunteered to participate in the CORSIA offsetting phase. So from 88 states in 2021 to 107 states. At the time of writing this report, I think this amount has now grown all the way to 118 in recent times. So gradual increase in terms of states' participation, also in the Southeast Asian region. Some key considerations once we start implementing CORSIA. First of all, the environmental integrity of offsets used under CORSIA needs to be ensured, so that we can actually be ensured that the offset credits deliver additional emission reductions. Also, the topic of double counting will need to be addressed, so that the same unit is not being used twice in different schemes, CORSIA and national schemes, for example. And the recent COP26 meeting in Glasgow last year actually achieved key developments and progress in this field. And last but not least, international cooperation is key in building capacity in terms of CORSIA implementation and raising knowledge of this important ICAO policy. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to wrap up with a couple of points related to EASA's work in terms of meeting those key messages and recommendations. So what we are actually doing here in the agency to advance the performance of aviation in terms of environmental performance. One of the key activities for us would actually be to start assessing long-term pathways in terms of aviation noise and emissions, together with the goals that come with our global and European targets and objectives. So there's clearly a need to kind of look into the future. What is the feasibility of the goals? Are we on track to meet those goals? And what could be done to actually enhance the performance of the aviation sector to better align ourselves with those goals. One of the key policy, as mentioned already, is the Refuel EU regulation in Europe. So EASA plays a role in terms of monitoring the SAF supply and use in Europe. And there's also a role for EASA to report on an annual basis of the SAF market in Europe. So this will be an interesting development in the upcoming years, and I'm sure that in the next edition of the environmental report, this will be integrated as a part of our already existing reporting schemes. So much more information on SAF will be in the pipeline in the future. We are also looking into so-called clearinghouse, and there was a dedicated session on this in the previous webinar. So the clearinghouse, and the idea of it is to facilitate certification of new SAF production pathways. There's plenty of different pathways, and this initiative tries to help producers in terms of introducing new pathways to produce SAF and penetrate the market eventually. Research activities are ongoing. Just to mention the topic of non-CO2 here. So EASA published a study on this topic a couple of years ago. Further research activities might be in the pipeline. And also one key area of further future work is on adaptation. So this might be something where EASA becomes more active once we move on. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide, just wrapping up some other key areas of future work. So new noise requirements to support novel technologies are in the pipeline, so mainly in the area of drones and eVTOL aircraft. CAPE 13 work program is ongoing, as many of you probably know. One of the most important work items there is so-called dual standard setting process, where we are looking into CO2 and noise standards and how those could be improved moving on. We are looking into airport infrastructure needs for green technologies, as mentioned as a part of the airport chapter. This is potentially a massive area of future work, and we are launching some activities there. Review of the ATM ANS environmental performance and related KPIs is ongoing. And last but not least, on market-based measures, continuous work to review the credibility of carbon markets is ongoing, in particularly potentially focusing on voluntary carbon markets and the so-called taxonomy system, which is currently being discussed in Europe, aimed to enhance sustainable investments in aviation sector. So I believe that's it in terms of our presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think I'll hand it back to Santi and Rebecca to go through any questions we may have received.
Indeed, thank you very much, Steve and Joonas. I think it has been quite a comprehensive coverage of the report itself. I know it's much more on the report, and there will be quite a lot of information for those more interested, and you can download the report and dive into the details. Let me, without delay, I think sharing the Slido, taking over from you, Steve. I see there has been a good number of questions. Please confirm that you can see, Rebecca, you can see the Slido for everybody. Good. Okay, let's then address the first questions that I see on the screen. I like the first one, indeed. I think someone has read my brain because I was also thinking of the same. So it's, whoa, where all this data is coming from? Who are the data providers? Airlines directly? And yes, I think you cover not only emissions, but also noise emissions. So not only CO2, non-CO2, noise. So yes, where all this data is coming from?
Yes, very good question. The data comes from multiple sources, really, across the different chapters. Within the sector overview, we draw on the traffic data provided from Eurocontrol, the Stat4 forecast out to long-term forecast out to 2050. There's a fleet database that we use. We draw on the modeling capabilities that we have in order to understand, okay, what is the traffic that's operating around Europe? What is the fleet that meets that demand? And then what's the environmental impact of that fleet? So it draws on multiple different data sources in order to compile that overview and then model the environmental impact. And that's why coordination, both at a European level, between EASA, the Environment Agency, Eurocontrol, the Commission, and the Member States is important in order to be able to work together, collect this data and process it and present it in a very focused way within the report. On the technology side, obviously EASA provides a lot of information there in terms of the products that it certifies and emerging technology that's coming through. ATM Ops, we get information a lot there from the Performance Review Board and the Single European Sky Performance Scheme that has environmental indicators. So we draw directly from that process to understand what's going on in that area. I think a key issue is sustainable aviation fuel. So we've seen over the last few reports that it was extremely difficult to get data on that particular topic. And after the 2019 report, recognizing it was extremely difficult to get data, we initiated various studies looking at how could we put in place a monitoring system on that. That fed into the Refuel EU proposals that are about to be adopted over the next few months. And within that proposal now is a monitoring proposal to collect data on how much SAF is being supplied, how much SAF is being used, and obviously EASA will then provide an annual report on how the SAF market is evolving. So I think that's a good example of where we use the report to try and understand what information was out there and where there were data gaps that fed into a work and a process to fill that gap, such that we can start to collect data going forward. So hopefully that provides a bit of background in terms of the various data sources that we draw on. And obviously from a market-based measures perspective, we draw on the key systems in terms of CORSIA and ETS.
Okay, indeed is, if I understand also from your initial point where you were describing the three or the sequence of report, is kind of a building based on the experience. So the first report probably was not so comprehensive as this latest, and is growing based on the use of the information that is being done, or the request that you are receiving from the, let's say, from the consumers of the report.
Absolutely, yes. If you have a chance to download the three reports on the website, you'll see that the report has evolved significantly since the first version, based on lessons learned, based on additional data we've collected, based on the significant developments in the policy area, especially over the last 3 years. Environment's becoming a higher priority. There's a lot more work being done in this area, and it's a challenge often to collate all of this information on everything that's going on and focus it within the report. We try to take the approach of providing a high-level overview, with key references within an appendix called a list of resources that points people in the direction of where they can get more detailed information on the topic if they're interested.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. So I brought a question that I saw on the WebEx chat, and I brought it to Slido. So it's how to approach for Corsia certification for SAF technology developer if the process is at a pilot plant scale and commercial scale may take 1 to 2 years. So I suppose how to advance the sustainability certification. Not sure if probably that would have been better for the colleagues, the experts in SAF, but maybe you can already orientate a bit or refer to any specific area of action that is undertaken.
Yes, Santi, we can certainly try. In order to be approved under Corsia, the staff, of course, will need to meet the sustainability criteria that is set in the Corsia documentation. And in order to prove this, the fuel will need to be certified by a certifier under a sustainability certification scheme. So right now there are 2 sustainability certification schemes approved under Corsia. So this is of course a key step in the process if there is a producer who wants to produce fuel that is approved under Corsia. Now, when I was mentioning the clearinghouse, it is potentially a bottleneck in the process to acquire the required certifications. And here I'm not only referring to the sustainability certification, but also to the safety certification. So in order to be approved as a jet fuel, the fuel will need to meet ASTM standardization requirements. And this is actually a process that can take quite a while. And when I was talking about the clearinghouse, the idea of that concept is actually to help, especially new novel pathways, maybe smaller producers, to pass through the ASTM certification from jet fuel safety consideration perspective. So I think it's hard to give a straightaway answer for this question right now, but I think those are the key considerations that will need to be kept in mind when there is a novel producer of SAF technology developer or SAF producer to bear in mind. In terms of the approved SAF pathways that can be used to produce SAF, I believe there's 7 of them approved right now. A couple of more are up and coming in the pipeline. And the report really includes more information on this aspect as well. But there are different pathways to produce SAF that can be used, that have slightly different characteristics in terms of feedstocks and technologies. But as we speak, there are those 7 of them, if I remember it correctly.
Thank you very much, Joonas. So I understand it is obviously for the SAF expert more to elaborate, but the idea of having this fast track or a kind of expedite track for these novel fuels to advance their certification and to, let's say, shorten the period to make it available in shorter time. And also probably having an impact on cost and all these additional benefits that it may have. We will be overshooting a bit the initial time slot. We will take 5-10 minutes. I think it's worth addressing at least the questions we have on the screen. So obviously, this one it was something that as soon as we talk about recommendations, obviously we pose the question on to whom, and probably also the side question, and this is my addition, and how is it being taken? I mean, so who are the main addresses of the report's recommendation practically? And I add my own bit, which is how it's being taken. I mean, how you feel the recommendations being addressed or being received.
Yeah, thanks for that question. In the recommendations within the latest reports, you'll see that we don't assign it to any specific organization. It's more focused on the areas related to where we feel improvements can be made. In most cases, it's pretty clear in terms of a recommendation where we think things could be improved, and it's linked to organizations that have existing remits. And some of those recommendations, as you've seen in the last few slides we presented, clearly fall within the EASA's remit, and we expect to follow up on those recommendations in terms of future actions, integrate them into the Sustainability Aviation program that we have, and to try and respond to some of these things that we've identified within the report. So, but it's also looking a bit further than beyond just the EASA. It highlights some of the issues in terms of existing regulatory remits, such as the implementation of performance-based navigation, where we're currently behind schedule in terms of the implementation of that, and that clearly lies in the remit of the member states to implement that. And then on the market-based measures side, that's clearly an area where we work very closely with the Commission, who has responsibility for the ETS, and coordinating with them in terms of work ongoing within ICAO. So it has a wide-reaching kind of context. EASA will certainly pick up and is already working on some of these issues within our existing program, and we continue to support other organizations who also can contribute towards these areas. And clearly, where there's new areas, EASA will be looking to see, okay, how can we provide support in that area? If we are looking to put in place long-term noise emission reduction targets, monitor that over time in terms of looking to meet the European Green Deal objectives, where we feel more insight is needed on progress towards those goals, clearly EASA could play a role there in terms of the context of this environmental report. So it is a wide-reaching set of recommendations, and we on purpose didn't allocate it to individual organizations, because it's a combined team effort where all organizations will have to in some way or another contribute towards improving the performance of the sector.
Yeah, I think it's also, let's say, a necessary measure to ensure this independence, accurate, and objectivity, so that it's not perceived as being the kind of the tool of pushing or putting pressure on certain organizations to do something, but it's a collective, let's say, result and collective conclusion that leads to those recommendations. And then obviously it's for the relevant bodies to take them up and to work on them.
Absolutely.
Let me move on to the next one. There is one is very specific. I think there was someone looking very in detail to the graphs. Okay, I'm moving to the next one. So is there a comparison between regions? Let me highlight the question I'm addressing. Is there a comparison between regions on environmental performance and conclusions in the report? Yeah, there is. I would expect Southeast Asia, I understand SEA stands for Southeast Asia, performing better because of the newer fleet. I guess it refers to the map. There was a moment where you were presenting a map of different regions. Is there such a comparison in the report, or is not meant to address that?
No, there's no comparison within the environmental report. It's very much focused on the European region and collating data to communicate on what's going on within Europe. So we don't make comparisons with other regions as part of this particular process. No.
Let me privilege, I'll give a favor to a question that relates more to the coordination with the stakeholders. So how is the actual coordination with the stakeholders to reach conclusions in the report? I guess tankering, yeah, you were referring at a certain moment on the tankering, this practice was contested by airlines?
Yeah, so we do have, as I said, an advisory group that contains all of the industry, parts of the industry, but we also bring in NGOs and research organizations, which is important in terms of providing a balanced discussion on the topics that we bring forward. We engage with them through meetings on a regular basis during the process of compiling the report, in order to get their input in terms of what they think should be within the report, the structure of the report, and then ultimately, as we develop the draft report itself, we do provide it to them in order for them to provide feedback. And we try to take on board that feedback from all stakeholders, not just industry, in order to find a balanced perspective on what's going on within the sector. Within the report, clearly it's not possible for us to do all of the research that goes into the report. The sector overview is specific work that we do to communicate at a high level the sort of traffic and environmental impacts, but we draw on information that's going on within the sector over the last 3 years. That can be policy proposals, research, studies that have been performed. And one of the studies that we used, as mentioned here, was a study looking at tankering. We ensured that the studies we're quoting are from reputable organizations. We provide a summary of what's going on, and then a reference to the actual report itself, such that if what people want more information, they know where to go to get that. So yes, sometimes there are questions with regards to the underlying studies and the information that's in the report. The objective, though, is to try and provide a balanced perspective with regard to all of the issues that the industry is trying to address. And everyone recognizes that in reality, economic tankering does occur within the sector, and this was a study that provided some insight in terms of the extent of that economic tankering that we felt was appropriate in order to bring it forward for discussion to inform work going forward.
Thanks a lot. And that quite interesting is how you will handle these specific discussions about a specific measure and how the analysis and all the investigation or the assessment on this specific practice. Let me take one that affects or is related to the ASEAN region. So how the EU taxonomy can affect the ASEAN region. Here, I must confess, I have difficulties as well on the taxonomy. I think I will be more on there is another question related to taxonomy and what is it? I mean, what does it imply? Maybe you can you can answer the two questions together.
Yes, I may take these two questions on taxonomy. So to start with what the taxonomy actually means in this context. In the EU, there's work ongoing to define what would actually count as a so-called sustainable investment. And this work is not only limited to aviation, it covers basically all the industry sectors, but aviation is also part of that. So there are initiatives trying to actually define what kind of aircraft would be considered as sustainable, what kind of airport activities could be considered as sustainable, and so on. And the term taxonomy refers to this classification of economic activities which are considered as sustainable. And underpinning that, there is a discussion on so-called technical screening criteria that could be used to screen activities that could be considered as green, so to say, in this context. So taking a practical example for aircraft, the current discussions around this taxonomy are connected to existing standardization limits for ICAO CO2 emissions standards, for example. So the taxonomy could use this certification data to actually come up with some sort of ideas on which aircraft could be more environmentally efficient than others. And then to the second question on how this affects the ASEAN region, well, the current discussion on taxonomy is restricted to Europe, to our knowledge. So the idea would be that once the taxonomy and the technical screening criteria will be in place, this would be a kind of guidance to financial institutions, banks, for example, to drive and guide their investment decisions when they want to invest in green technology. And as a part of that investment to green technology, there would be investments to aircraft that would be having more efficient environmental performance, so to say. In terms of the geographical reach of this regulation, right now we are talking about Europe in this context. But yeah, as mentioned, the current discussion on the technical screening criteria is based on ICAO standardization data, but the geographical reach would be in Europe mainly at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, I think we have another topic for a dedicated webinar. I think this taxonomy will, in the future, probably require some explanations on diving in more details. So let me, as I'm conscious of time, I think we normally exceed up to 15 minutes and we are reaching that mark. So I will place the colleagues interested on the reply of the remaining question related to the age of the aircraft to dive into the report. I think is probably a good incentive to dive into the report and see if we can find the answer to this question on the drop of the average age. Okay, so thanks a lot, Joonas, Steve. I think it has been quite interesting. Maybe before or as a closing kind of question from my side is maybe your kind of takeaways or your experience in building this report, especially Steve, you've been here since the first one. I understand you've been one of the generators of the first report, and therefore I think you have all this experience from the very beginning in terms of building the report and how it has been growing along the years and how it has been, let's say, being more and more useful for the different stakeholders. So please, Steve, if you want just your takeaways or kind of a personal experience more, that would be very valuable probably for the colleagues online.
Yes, thanks, Santi. Maybe just a few reflections. I think the report, as I said, has evolved over time. It is now seen as a robust source of information that feeds into all sorts of discussions at the policy level, but also informs the public as to what's going on. It helps us engage with EU citizens across the region. Feeds into future work programs, acts as a point of reference every 3 years to understand exactly where are we, where have we gone, what are the future trends, are we doing enough to address these issues based on the goals that we've set ourselves. It's proved an extremely valuable vehicle and process to help member states work together at a regional level and engage with EU organizations to come to a common understanding as to what's going on and what needs to be done. So from that perspective, at a regional level, it's proved extremely helpful in terms of engaging with key stakeholders, communicating on what we're doing, and ensuring that we are hopefully going to achieve the European Green Deal objectives, which is the high-level targets that we're all aiming for.
Thank you very much, Steve. And obviously, it can be extrapolated now to the long-term aspirational goals for globally, and how the contribution of the different regions and different countries will go for that. So thanks a lot, indeed. Thanks. Thanks to the whole team, and especially to Joonas and Steve for providing these insights on the report. As I said, it's on the EASA website. The presentation itself will be published together with a recording of this webinar, so you can share it with colleagues or take the bits that you consider more interesting or most interesting for your different colleagues. So let me then conclude with just a kind of a hint of what's coming. So we will have similar webinars on the role of airports, obviously for the upscale of SAF, and looking at the airport being the SAF hub. Also on financing, I think Joonas with the taxonomy was already kind of hinting that this will be an important element, and obviously for SAF will also be one of the elements to consider. And then on sustainability certification schemes, so there were different questions related to that, and there will be further information from the expert in this regard. So thanks a lot. I think that has been quite interesting, and we welcome you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.